But if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God and know his will and approve what is excellent because you are instructed from the law, and if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth, you then who teach others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that one must not commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law dishonor God by breaking the law. For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. Verse 25, for circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law, but if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, while not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision, then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law will condemn you who have the written code and circumcision but break the law. For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical. But a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. All right. So, last week, we examined the Gentiles' so-called excuses in Romans 2:12 through 16. We saw that the works of the law were written on the Gentiles' heart, so they are without excuse. Gentiles are also shown the invisible attributes of God by creation. That's something that's, shown to everyone, but, Gentiles are included in everyone. The Gentiles do not have excuse unless they follow their conscience perfectly, which we know hasn't been done and will never be done. There's no man who has followed his conscience perfectly other than Christ. But Christ, covers both aspects for both groups of he followed his conscience perfectly as well as he kept the law perfectly. So just whenever I say, because, I toss out blatant statements of no one has done that, just know Christ is excluded from that. Christ is the one exception. And when I'm talking about humanity as a whole in their sinful nature, Christ is not included in that. I think I specified that last week, but, I gotta make sure that I'm not accidentally telling y'all heresy. Paul also introduced the concept that we are not righteous by simply hearing the law, rather by being doers of the law is where righteousness comes from. Paul has shown that the Gentiles are without excuse, so now he will focus on the Jewish people for the rest of chapter 2 and show how they are without excuse. Paul will address the two major fields here are that the Jews would boast in would be in physical possession of the law, having the law in physicality, as well as circumcision. So those are the two main focuses that this last chunk of Romans 2 really is going to focus on. So let's go back to these verses, and we can start to look at them, getting the meat and potatoes of them, if you will. Starting from verse 17, but if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God and know his will and approve what is excellent because you are instructed from the law, and if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, an instructor of the foolish, a teacher of children, having in the law the embodiment of knowledge and truth. So right now, Paul is setting up how one of these Jewish people or hypocritical Jews or a Pharisaical Jew would really describe themselves. They rely on the law and boast in God because they were specifically chosen. They have been instructed by the law. They consider themselves to have special privilege because they have the law. Paul made the case earlier that Gentiles have the works of the law written on their hearts. This would insinuate that the Jews don't have special privileges and won't be judged differently. Paul is going to explicitly condemn the Jews in a second, but he shows that they cannot boast in having physical possession of the law. It doesn't make them being judged to a lesser degree or to a harsher extent. And Paul did say that the Jews will be judged first. That doesn't mean that they're judged differently. It's just the order of succession for which groups of people are getting judged. The Jews first, and then the Gentiles, but the Jews are first for either heaven or complete judgment. It's a double-edged sword almost of judgment, but it doesn't mean that the metric that God will judge the Jews by and the metric that God will judge the Gentiles by will be different. They do not have some special exempt card because they have the law and physicality. They can't flash the law card and be like, hey, we got the law, so like I'm good to go to heaven. No, that's not something that is being argued for here in Romans 2. But yeah, so this is how they would describe themselves, obviously leaving out all the bad parts, only doing the good stuff, of the stuff that keeps up their reputation and which upholds what they would consider special privilege of having the law. Verse 21. You then who teaches others, do you not teach yourself? While you preach against stealing, do you steal? You who say that one must commit adultery, do you commit adultery? You who abhor idols, do you rob temples? You who boast in the law, dishonor God by breaking the law. For as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. All right. So Paul's switching from describing the Jew and how they would describe themselves to now how they probably wouldn't describe themselves, the ugly parts of how they act and what they don't really want people to see. You could say that this would be the secrets that they would hold in their heart, the secrets that they would try to hide from God, as they would try to hide in when they're being judged. However, you cannot hide secrets from God. This is Paul is showing that they are sinful, even if they put up a front on the outside. The very, verses 17 through 20 was the front that they put up on the outside to appear righteous and receive the praise of man. But now this is the actual inner truth of what's happening. They want to keep their image of righteousness while ignoring their own sin. They condemn others for stealing, adultery, idolatry, while committing all of it themselves. This is all dishonorable to God. This is all sinful. They are lawbreakers while condemning others for being lawbreakers. They judge others to the standard of the law while thinking they are exempt because they have special privilege of being chosen by God and having the law and physicality. You don't get a special privilege to be judged differently. If you're going to abide by the law and abide in the law, then you will be judged by the law. And when they are clearly being law breakers, then that's dishonorable to God. That's sinful. And moreover, when it happens to when they show this side of themselves to the Gentiles, God becomes blasphemed. The Gentiles blaspheme God because of what they witness from these hypocritical Jews. But before I get into that particular quote in a second, one thing that I would like to clear up is you may have confusion by the connection between abhor idols but then rob temples. It's not kind of like the other ones where it's like, oh, you condemn stealing, but then you steal, or you commit adultery, or you condemn adultery, but then commit adultery. And this one's like you abhor idols, but then you rob temples. It's kind of a weird disconnect at first glance. This isn't indicating that Jews were robbing like pagan temples that were for idol worship. I don't think that that's what's happening here. This is more referring to Jews misappropriating funds in the temple, in the very temple of worship, to fatten their own pockets with coins. the Jews condemned idol worship while turning around and creating an idol out of money. Whether your idol be fake gods or money or sex or anything like that is still idolatry, and it's still a sin against the immortal God. So that's kind of the connection between robbing temples and idols, the condemnation of idols, but then you have your own idols that you are putting before God. So in verse 24, the quote is taken from Isaiah 52, verse 5. It is paraphrased, however, I think it still has the same meaning. When the Jews condemned lawbreaking but actively participate in lawbreaking, the Gentiles despise the name of God. Hypocrisy is dishonoring to God and makes others hate the name of God. So when you have flagrant hypocrisy in the face of people who don't believe in God, then they are going to say, wow, this is what God's people look like. The God is not good, or the Christian God is not good, or the Jewish God is not good. When you display hypocrisy towards others of constantly condemning something but then turning around and just seeping in the very same sin and not dealing with it and not being repentant of it. And it's just the hypocrisy that happens makes Gentiles blaspheme the name of God, because you are supposed to be almost a representative for God as a Jewish people. Of you are his holy nation. You are supposed to be set apart. You are supposed to be different. But now you're not acting different. You're acting like the world while giving up a front of righteousness when you do not have righteousness. You are only seeking the praise of man and not the praise of God. It is very, you're seeking your own death at that point. And Paul is really condemning these things. He's set up the whole, this is what you think you look like when you have the law. Oh, you teach children, you're so good, you help the blind, you do all this stuff. But then the reality is that you're thieving adulterers with idols out the wazoo. It's not, you are not going to be saved from judgment because you have the law and physicality. That changes nothing for what judgment looks like for you at the end. That does not change a single thing. God will not let sin go by unpunished. It is a transgression against him and against his character, and he will not let it go unpunished. And that is what Paul is making the case for. And so far, cumulatively, for Romans 1 and 2, what we've looked at so far, he's made that case for the Gentiles, and now he's making that case for the Jews. He's making a case that everyone has either had the law or the works of the law written on their hearts and disobeyed their hearts, or has had the works of the law written in physicality but still disobeyed the law in physicality. But everyone knows that God exists because of creation and because of his invisible attributes shown through creation, and no one has been able to keep the precepts of the law. And everyone is guilty of sin against God, because Paul is going through great extents here to show that you do not have an excuse. And the Gentile, the reason that it's focusing on two things here, because later we're going to talk about circumcision, is because the Jews would generally go to two things for why they have excuse of not to be judged. One is having the law and physicality, and two is they're circumcised. They're in the bloodline of Abraham. That's the two things that they would say, and Paul says that does not matter if you are blatantly sinful in your own life and disregarding God and his holiness. And, eventually, this gets very disheartening for a while, because Paul is trying to make it disheartening, but it eventually takes the upturn of salvation in Christ, of that you have failed under the law, and that you will eventually, or that the upturn is Christ died for you and died for your sins, and you can have salvation in him. But let's continue on this, on verse 25. For circumcision indeed is of value if you obey the law, but if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? Then he who is physically uncircumcised but keeps the law, will you who have the written code and circumcision but break the law? For no one is a Jew who is merely one outwardly, nor is circumcision outward and physical, but a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is a matter of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the letter. His praise is not from man, but from God. Okay, so that's that's kind of a confusing way to put this kind of question, or this dichotomy that Paul is presenting. So one, you have a Jewish man who is circumcised, but he has the law in physicality, but he breaks the law. And then the other scenario is you have a Gentile who isn't circumcised, but upholds the law to all of its degree and keeps its precepts. Or will then the Jewish man's circumcision, that counts for nothing, but the Gentile's uncircumcision, not because the Gentile is just because the Gentile is not circumcised physically, does not mean that he doesn't have circumcision of the heart. And essentially, what Paul is getting at here is that circumcision is an outward instance that is supposed to point to an inward reality. It is similar to baptism here, where baptism is an outward expression that indicates a reality of salvation. Now, I am not arguing for paedobaptism here. I'm not telling you to go baptize your children because the Jews circumcise their children. No, and there is definitely overlap within these two things, but it's a conversation for a different day. Paedobaptism is not something I agree with. But that being said, it's supposed to be a marking on the outside that points into an inward reality. So if a Jew is one who just has a circumcision on the outside but has nothing else on the inside, then their circumcision does not matter. In a similar way, when a non-Christian gets baptized, or a nominal Christian gets baptized, or someone who isn't saved gets baptized, then they are not going to be saved by their baptism. Their baptism does not point to their salvation, because on the inside, they are not actually saved. A baptism is not what saves, it's what is supposed to point to the inward circumcision of the heart, or you could say being a part of a covenant with God. That is what the purpose of these two things are. So you may be confused as to why the hard focus on circumcision, but Jews thought that circumcision is what saved them, and that a circumcised Jew could not go to hell even if they were a lawbreaker, that this special privilege that they have from circumcision is being a part of the bloodline of Abraham, and that they would not go to hell even if they were complete lawbreakers. Circumcision, they would point to circumcision and the physicality of the law as what saves them. But God does not judge by circumcision. It is made clear that is not what happens, and Paul is making it clear that is the case, that they are not getting judged differently because they have circumcision. It's so hard to say that word over and over again. But yeah, they're not going to be judged specially because of the circumcision. God is not going to ignore all of the law breaking simply because they were circumcised. Like I said, God is going to judge all sin. So, circumcision is only useful if you obey the law. You cannot cling on to circumcision as something that saves you, because circumcision is a part of the law. And if you abide in physical circumcision as what saves you, then you are condemned by the rest of the law. If you are saying that the law is what saves you and that circumcision is a part of that, and you can only point to circumcision as being what you have kept from the law, then you are going to be guilty because you are a lawbreaker. And the thing that you're trying to root your salvation in, that being the law, it's not going to save you because you're breaking the law. So now Paul is making the argument that circumcision's value is not in its physicality, but it's in the response to its physicality. So like I said earlier, circumcision is similar to baptism. They are both labels put on the outside of someone, which are supposed to indicate a inner reality. That inner reality being that inner reality of having a circumcised heart, or in other words, being a part of the covenant. This both goes for baptism and circumcision. Like I said earlier, I'm not a Paedo-Baptist, but just because there's overlap doesn't mean the same exact thing. How would women go to heaven if they can't be circumcised in the Jewish tradition? So the command is for every male to be circumcised. So I don't think that then that excludes women. I think that they would say it's like a different case for both genders. I don't know. I would have to I could be wrong on that, but that's initial. Women have already been circumcised. Huh. No pee-pee, I guess so. No pee-pee, so yeah, they're good, because that's what circumcision. Yeah. All right, moving on. So just as physical baptism is no value if it doesn't indicate an inner reality of being saved, i.e. the act of baptism itself does not save you, circumcision functions in the same way. To properly obey the law of circumcision for a Jew, you must be circumcised on the inside of your heart. And this is not just a New Testament concept. Deuteronomy 10:16 says, circumcise therefore the foreskin of your heart and be no longer stubborn. So yeah, it's not just a New Testament concept. It's just something from the Old Testament as well. If they had an understanding of circumcision of the heart and all that stuff, because circumcision is supposed to indicate to a circumcised heart, which in that case would mean a righteous heart, a heart that is to obey God. Paul, some people might try to take this portion right here. So if a man who is uncircumcised keeps the precepts of the law, will not his uncircumcision be regarded as circumcision? So some people may confuse this for a case being made for a so-called innocent native, that being someone who is completely cut off from the world and doesn't know about God, all that stuff. But don't let people make that argument here. Paul has gone through great extents to show that the innocent native doesn't exist, because we have all failed to abide by our conscience, and there is no one who follows all the precepts of the law. So the innocent native doesn't exist because there is no one who is completely and wholly innocent. Paul is rather showing the Jew that he cannot only be a law keeper on the outside. Paul has gone to great length in the past 2 chapters to show the sinfulness of both Jews and Gentiles. The important thing to reinforce is righteousness is not simply attained by being hearers of the law. You can appear as righteous by being a hearer, but God knows your heart, and God knows you are not a doer of the law. If you are only a hearer of the law, then you are only seeking the praise of man and not of God. God does not glorify knowledge, he glorifies doers. We are all not doers. We have all failed to keep the precepts of the law. We need Christ, who is the perfect keeper of the law, who died for us and our sin, while giving unto us his righteous record of doing rather than just hearing. Christ is our righteousness, and it is our belief in his name that we are justified. We should no longer try to justify ourselves by the law, because we have failed in every way, in every facet of the law. Now we obey the law to reflect Christ and to glorify his name, not to save ourselves. We should seek the praise of God and not the praise of man. The praise of God is infinitely more pleasing than any praise man can offer. It's you do not want to seek the praise of man over the praise of God. It is not something that is desirable. But yeah, so circumcision of the heart by the Spirit, and it's not an outward reality, but an inward reality. And seek the praise of God, not the praise of man. The praise of man will always be corrupt and always be unsatisfying, but the praise of God will be infinitely joyous to us, because, the praise of man comes from sin. Man is riddled with sin, and and the sin is not something that is ultimately enjoyable to us. So I guess let me wrap this up with there's about 7 ways that God judges in Romans 2 that have been pointed out. So let me give a quick summary of those. So God's judgment is according to truth. We see that in Romans 2:2. His judgment is according to accumulated guilt. We see that in Romans 2:5. His judgment is according to works. We see that in Romans 2:6. His judgment is without partiality. We see that in Romans 2:11. His judgment is according to performance, not knowledge. We see that in Romans 2:13. And his judgment is one that reaches into our hearts and is able to find everything. We can keep no secrets from God's judgment. That's in Romans 2:16. And then God's judgment is according to reality, not to nominal religious profession. That's in Romans 2:17 through 29. So the main focus of the passage that we had tonight of his judgment will be according to the inward reality and not the outward front that you put up. So, and with all of these, if his judgment is according to truth, guilt, works, without partiality, it's about our performance, about all of this stuff, then we are going to fail to come up to the standard of God's judgment. We will ultimately be condemned no matter what you do. You can't change anything about it. You can't unsin yourself. You cannot do that by your own means. Like I said earlier, Christ is the only means in which we are given salvation and forgiveness. And we take on his perfect record, which meets the standard of God's judgments, which when we are measured up to these standards, then we are seen as innocent because Christ was innocent. He became the sacrifice. He became the lamb that was slain for us. And he took on our sin while giving us his perfect record. And whenever we're talking about the judgment of God, it's always important to link it back to the salvation of Christ. And it's something that you can never deviate from the subject. You can never deviate God's judgment from the salvation that Christ offers. And that's why, I guess, for the past Romans 1 and 2, the most of it I've been talking about the salvation that Christ offers a lot. And 1, because that's the gospel, and that's obviously something that I'm going to teach right now. But then 2, you cannot deviate Christ from the Bible and from God's judgment, because he is the one who saves us from judgment. But Paul gets to that kind of later in Romans it's a long road that's filled with understanding completely the judgment of all of us, and how none of us have excuse, and how we will all be condemned. It is only by Christ that we are saved. But you really have to get through the first part of all of us being condemned to truly understand the great gift that we have been given. That is all I have for this passage. It was a bit shorter than I thought it was going to be, but I guess that's fine. We don't have to extend out a passage longer than you really need to. Is there any questions on what we've gone over tonight? No? Okay. Let me pray for us, and then we can be done. Lord, I just pray that we will seek your praise and not the praise of man, Lord. That we will seek to glorify you and to build you up, and not to build up ourselves, Lord, and to build up our own sin, God, but that we will follow the law and to just reflect Christ more every day, to praise your name, Lord. I just pray for the rest of this week that we will be able to just read our Bibles and to pray to you and to praise you, Lord, and that we'll be able to just build a relationship with you more, Lord, and to just understand you and your word in more depth every day, God, and that just it will never leave our minds, that our sinfulness we will always be aware of, Lord, but then that we will also be aware of the gift that we've been given, and that'll never leave our minds, and that we'll constantly just have thankfulness towards you, Lord. I just pray for all these things in your wonderful and holy name. Amen.